This is your Shiva sir, who is your social teacher of Sri Prakash Vidyaniketan, Paigarepata. Learning outcomes of today's lesson. 1. Understand how third world NAM countries formed. 2. Understand West Asian conflicts, formation of Israel from Palestine. 3. No growth of nationalism in the Middle East. 4. Peace movements, collapse of USSR and end of Cold War. Agenda. Preconceptual learning, word of the day, new words, content or video, summary, food for thought. Word of the day. Disband. It's a verb to stop somebody or something from operating as a group. Verb conjugations. Disband, disbanded, disbanded, disbanding, disbands. Derivatives. Disbandment, noun, disbanded, adjective. Usage 1. Boris Elstine eventually won the presidential elections and announced the disbanding of USSR in 1991. Verb form. Usage 2. The government ordered terrorists for the disbandment in noun form. Usage 3. The disbanded terrorists again gathered together and planned this attack in adjective form. Usage 4 in verb form. Our auto union disbanded last year due to misunderstanding between president and secretary. Usage 5 question tag. When was our football team disbanded? Verb form. New words. 1. Antagonistic, it's adjective, showing dislike or opposition. 2. Pave, it's a verb, to cover a surface with flat stones or bricks. 3. Crisis, it's a noun, dangerous situation. 4. Crucifixion, verb, an ancient form of execution in which a person was nailed or bound to cross. 5. Legitimate, adjective, according to law. 6. Conflict, it's a noun, meaning a struggle between opposing forces. 7. Contention, noun, meaning rivalry. 8. Retaliation, noun, meaning an act of revenge. 9. Foster, it's a verb, encourage the development of. 10. Arsenals, it's a noun, meaning a collection of weapons. Hi children, this is Shivaji sir, who is your social teacher of Sri Prakash Vidyaniketan, Paigarepata. Last class, I just posed a question to you. Can anyone recall it? Yeah, that's good. Define third world countries. Can anyone say what are third world countries? Yes, it's good. Third world countries are nothing but NAM countries, we can say. Again, where this NAM arised. After Second World War, world is divided into two blocks. What are the two blocks? Two military blocks. One is capitalistic bloc, the other is communistic bloc. Capitalistic bloc is headed by USA. Communistic bloc is headed by USSR. Why there is a supremacy? Why there is a rivalry between these blocks? Main reason is military supremacy they want, and their ideological conflicts are there. ideology. Means communism, USA is following capitalism, USSR is following communism. So different ideologies, right? And also to gain economic supremacy over colonial countries. These, anyhow, these two countries, USA and USSR, tried to drag more countries, especially colonial countries, to their side, either by providing economic assistance or providing military assistance, and so on. Some countries, they don't want to join in any one of the blocks, either communistic bloc or headed by USSR, capitalistic bloc headed by USA. So they don't want to join in any of the blocks, means non-aligned, not to join in any of the blocks. Some countries with the leadership of India, they formed as non-aligned countries. This is nothing but third world bloc, a third world countries, especially the countries which got independence after 1950s, like that. We can are the members of this NAM, non-aligned movement. What are the aims of this NAM? Racial discrimination is one, opposing imperialism or colonialism. Next, supporting disarmament, not making more weapons. And finally, achievement of human development. Right. In 1947, first Asian conference has taken place in Delhi. 1949, second Asian conference has taken place, that also in Delhi. 1955, Bandung conference took place. This is in Bandung, Indonesia, where so there is a action plan for set upping NAM, non-aligned movement. In 1956, again, so here the Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who is the Prime Minister of India at that time, Sukarno from Indonesia, Kwame Nkrumah from Kenya, Marshal Tito from Yugoslavia, these all gathered in Brioni. It is in Yugoslavia. And finally, they decided to establish NAM. The first summit of NAM, it has taken place in 1961, that is in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, with 25 countries in the starting. But present, if you see, more than 120 countries are there. On the screen, we are able to see a picture with 5 members. This is nothing but NAM meeting 1960. The participants are Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru from India, Kwame Nkrumah of Kenya, Gamal Abdul Nasser of Egypt, Sukarno of Indonesia, Tito of Yugoslavia at NAM meeting 1960. We know world is divided into two military blocks, right? Because of ideological conflict. Though this conflict did not leave much space for those who did not want to be involved in either of the blocks, there was an attempt to create one. The core concerns of people, especially those who were recently decolonized, like poverty, disease, inequality, and colonialism, were not addressed by any of these issues of contention. The first summit was held at Belgrade in Yugoslavia in September 1961. It was attended by 25 member countries, and by 2012, the membership has grown to 120 countries with 17 observers. The first summit was the culmination of three major concerns: cooperation among the member nations of NAM, most of them who had newly emerged as free countries, growing Cold War tensions, and its impact on the world at large. Lastly, to prevent any of the newly decolonized independent countries from joining any of the military blocs. Over the years, the NAM helped countries like India to take an independent posture when the two superpowers fell apart and pulled the countries to their side. It also helped the newly emerging countries to bargain for space and assistance from the superpowers by playing one against the other. To some extent, it also helped to ease tensions among us the NAM countries, even though both the blocs looked at NAM with suspicion. The US regarded the NAM as being closer to the USSR and wider international issues. Its inaction in the case of Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was often seen as a position country to NAM's principles. Another weakness of NAM was the inability to effectively stop its own members from waging wars against each other. Thus, when Iran and Iraq were in a long war issuing 7 or more years, NAM could do little about it. Despite these limitations, the NAM helped the newly independent nations assert their autonomy in international affairs in a world torn between the two superpowers. West Asia refers to the region between Europe and Asia. The term Middle East is also used to describe this area. The conflicts that developed between Arabs and Jews are often described as the West Asian crisis. It was mainly related to the occupation of Palestine, which was inhabited by Arabs, was under the control of Britain before Second World War. In it is situated Jerusalem, which is a holy city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. The Jews traditionally considered Palestine as their promised land, from where they had been exiled in ancient times and pushed across Europe and Asia. In Europe, they were a persecuted community had developed Christians considered the them responsible for the crucifixion which called for the uniting Jews. The conflict came to a head in Germany under the Nazis when millions of Jews of Europe built a separate state of Jews. After 1945, this demand was supported by Western powers. However, since Palestinians, who were mostly Arab Muslims, were already living there, this became a bone of contention. Matters were also complicated by the discovery of massive oil reserves in the Middle East, especially in the Arabian Peninsula. Both US and USSR wanted to bring this region under their sphere of influence and would not let the other country establish its control. In 1947, United Nations passed a resolution according to the which Palestine was divided into two parts, Arab and Jewish states. In 1948, the British withdrew their troops from Palestine and Israel was created for Jewish, and the Arabs did not agree to giving up their homeland. The Arabs refused to recognize Israel as their legitimate state. The policies pursued by State of Israel increased the bitterness. The Arabs were forced to leave their homes and properties and had to take shelter as refugees in other Arab states. The president of Egypt, Gamal Abdul Nasser, made an effort to unite the Arabs. He formed Fedayins, nothing but suicide squads for causing explosions in public places in Israel. He adopted aggressive policies against Britain and France and demanded that Britain should withdraw its troops from the Suez Canal. The United States withdrew aid to Egypt for the construction of Aswan Dam. Nasser nationalized Suez Canal with the support of USSR, who supplied arms and ammunitions for Egypt's struggle against the West. On the screen, we are able to see Suez Canal, which is connecting Red Sea and Mediterranean Sea. On the screen, we are able to see a dam. This is nothing but Aswan Dam of Egypt. In 1956, Israel attacked Egypt with the support of Western powers, and both the United States and USSR demanded a cessation of war and a ceasefire. Israel had to withdraw its army. In 1967, Arabs attacked Israel once again. Israel decided that offense is the best form of defense, and it attacked Egypt and destroyed its entire air force. It also occupied the territories of Gaza, Golan Heights, and the West Bank. Israel, while refusing to return the occupied territories despite UN resolution, agreed for a ceasefire. Israel believed that these occupied territories would act as buffer zones. This war was a setback to the Arab cause. In the meanwhile, an organization called Palestinian Liberation Organization. On the screen, we are able to see that picture related to that, its symbols and next. PLO hereafter was established in 1964 in Jordan and added a new dimension by bringing together all different Arab factions. Its aim was to regain the land it lost without violence. However, in 1967, PLO, under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, applied pressure and force on the Arab states to attack Israel. But the Arab states were not very enthusiastic. Hence, a faction of PLO led by Arafat carried out terrorist attacks like plane hijackings, holding hostage the Israel Olympic squad at the Munich Olympics in September 1972 and killing many of the sportspersons, etc. Israel used such attacks by the Palestinians to mount further attacks on them and refused to implement the promises it had made. The region has been constantly in a state of war and terrorist attacks as a result of retaliation and counter retaliation. The PLO too broke into many mutually warring factions. Eventually, Arafat gave up terrorism and agreed to find peaceful solution by recognizing the formation of Israel. He held negotiations with Israel to end the long war and came to many agreements regarding self-rule for Palestinians. Israel agreed for withdrawal of its forces from West Bank in addition to giving voting rights to the Arab residents of Palestine. However, this was not successful as Israel failed to implement its promises and continued to attack the Palestinians under one pretext or other. Many countries agreed to recognize PLO as a legitimate representative of the Palestinian state and Arafat as its president. Arafat died in 2004 due to suspected poisoning. The Palestinians are still fighting for their homeland and peace under very difficult conditions of exile and warfare. On the screen, we are able to see a map This map is related to the Palestinians' loss of land in 1947 to present days. On the screen, we are able to see Middle East nationalism. Its objective is cover political and social events that lead to the development of nationalism in the Middle East. The growth of nationalism in the Middle East. The continued support of the US to Israel and the plight of Palestinians created a widespread feeling against the US in the region. The US also became unpopular because it supported undemocratic regimes in this area, so that the oil reserves were available to the US and its allies. People, on the other hand, wanted the revenue from oil resources to be used for the welfare of common people who did not have any other resources in the desert area. In 1968, a coup took place in Iraq in which Saddam Hussein came to power with the help of twin slogan of Arab nationalism and socialism. On the screen, we are able to see a person who is none other than Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq. By socialism, they meant nationalization of oil resources and the use of oil revenues by the state to fund welfare measures for the citizens. Similar developments took place in Libya in 1969. These regimes combined welfare policies with very autocratic and dictatorial rule of a ruler or a small group. They did not allow any opposition or a democratic protest against themselves. In many cases, the opposition to the US and US backed regimes took religious colors and nationalist forces instead of supporting the idea of equitable distribution of wealth and opportunities, fostered the idea of establishing religious orthodoxy in those countries. A revolution took place in Iran in 1979, in which the old king of Iran, who was supported by the US, was removed, and a new government jointly controlled by Shia Islamic clerics and democratically elected leaders was established. The Taliban, which took over Afghanistan after the withdrawal of Soviet troops, similarly established an extremist Islamic state. These states tried to force all people to strictly follow the rules laid down in religious texts. In many cases, this meant the denial of basic freedom and equality of opportunity to women and to religious minorities. The beginning of the 21st century witnessed growing discontent among the Arabs, which resulted in the growth of religious terrorism. Some Arab terrorists hijacked two aircrafts in US and crashed into World Trade Center in New York, killing thousands of people. This led to war against Taliban and eventually to a war against Iraq. Find out more about these recent events from the newspapers and magazines. On the screen, we are able to see an explosion of twin towers in New York. The September 11th attacks, often referred to as 9/11, were a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by the Wahhabi terrorist group Al Qaeda against the United States on the morning of Tuesday, September 11, 2001. On the screen, we are able to see demolition of Berlin Wall that divided East and West Germany. As a part of that, we are going to learn peace movements and collapse of USSR and the end of Cold War. As the time passed, USSR and USA came under the tremendous public pressure to roll back the arms race and destroy their nuclear arsenals. You will read more about this later on in this book. This forced them to hold talks to mutually reduce the stockpile and weapons race, and eventually to ban the nuclear test between 1985 to 1991. This was largely made possible by the coming to power of Mikhail Gorbachev in the USSR. He tried to transfer the politics of USSR by making it more open and bringing about radical changes. He was a liberal who introduced certain reforms for the revival of their economy and promoted healthy relations with the West. The reforms introduced by the open regime are often described as glasnost and perestroika. Around the same time, the countries of Eastern Europe faced a serious economic crisis and the USSR was not in a position to help them. As a result, popular movements demanding freedom, democracy, and economic reforms swept Eastern Europe. Soon, the governments, unable to manage the country, collapsed. This is best symbolized by the breakup of the infamous Berlin Wall that separated eastern and western portions of Germany and symbolized the unpopular control of the USSR over Germany. In the USSR itself, communist hardliners encouraged a coup in 1991 to remove the Gorbachev from power. This backfired and Boris Elstine resisted the coup on behalf of the Russian parliament. He eventually won the president elections and announced the disbanding of USSR in 1991. The components of the former USSR became independent countries and many of them formed an alliance with Russia later on. With the collapse of USSR, a new era began in the world politics, the era of unipolar world and the era of globalization. As a part of today's assignment, I would like to give a small question to you. In which year disbanding of USSR took place? As a part of today's lesson, we learned about NAM, non-aligned movement, West Asian conflicts, and also we learned growth of nationalism in the Middle East, and also we learned about peace movements and collapse of USSR. Right? As a part of today's lesson, just I'm going to give a small assignment to you. In which year disbanding of USSR has taken place? Thank you, children. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you. As a part of summary of today's lesson, word of the day we learned, new words we learned. We have gone through the previous knowledge and also video content and finally assignment. Thank you, children. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.